Beijing's humiliation at sea, how China nearly triggered World War III and lost the standoff before it began. The South China Sea, June 14, 2025, what unfolded that morning was nothing short of a geopolitical disaster for Beijing. A reckless gamble by a Chinese destroyer nearly ignited a conflict that would have drawn in the world's two most powerful militaries. Instead, it turned into a live demonstration of just how far behind China remains in modern warfare, exposing its weaknesses in the most embarrassing fashion possible. From the very start, the encounter was dripping with tension. At precisely 0923 hours, the USS Princeton, an American guided missile cruiser, picked up the unmistakable radar signature of a Chinese Type 052D destroyer. What should have been another routine patrol suddenly transformed into a dangerous confrontation when the Chinese vessel accelerated sharply, receiving explicit orders from Beijing to intercept the Americans and make them blink first. It was a reckless command, one that ignored both the international laws governing freedom of navigation and the overwhelming military reality, the U.S. Navy's unmatched dominance on open seas. But instead of forcing the Americans into retreat, the maneuver set the stage for a humiliating showdown. Within minutes, the Chinese ship, nicknamed John Chong, found itself at the mercy of the USS Princeton's Aegis combat system, arguably the most advanced naval sensor network on the planet. What followed was a masterclass in naval warfare, and the lesson was clear: if Beijing wanted to test America's resolve, it had picked the wrong waters, the wrong fleet, and the wrong century. Chinese aggression meets American firepower. By 0926 hours, U.S. Navy radar operators had already classified the incoming Chinese warship and flagged it as a high-risk threat. The Princeton's Combat Information Center calmly tracked the destroyer's path, calculating that within just 17 minutes, the Chinese ship would be within weapons range. For Beijing, the numbers were grim. The John Chong's YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could sprint across 200 kilometers of water in under 4 minutes, but the Princeton's arsenal of SM-6 interceptors had more than double that range, capable of obliterating them before they even left the launcher. It was a textbook mismatch, outdated Chinese hardware facing off against decades of American technological superiority. The Chinese weren't just trying to intimidate with one ship. The encounter quickly escalated into a broader demonstration of force. The Shandong carrier group began launching J-15 fighters, while sonar picked up the clumsy hum of a Type 039 submarine lurking nearby. Beijing was attempting a multi-domain intimidation maneuver, air, sea, and subsurface. But their execution was laughable. The submarine was so noisy it may as well have been playing its coordinates over loudspeaker, while the J-15 fighters, hand-me-downs of an old Soviet design, struggled for altitude and fuel, a glaring weakness of China's ski-jump carrier launch system. America unleashes the sky. By 0937 hours, the USS Nimitz answered Beijing's provocation with an unmistakable show of strength. Her flight deck roared alive as F divided by a -18E Super Hornets thundered into the sky in perfect intervals, each jet climbing high with enough fuel and firepower to wipe out the entire Chinese formation. The J-15s, meanwhile, were burning precious fuel just trying to stay airborne. American fighters, fully loaded and supported by electronic warfare aircraft like the EA-18G Growler, systematically dismantled the Chinese battle network. Radar screens aboard the Shandong filled with ghost contacts, fake blips, and phantom fighters. The Chinese pilots couldn't tell reality from electronic trickery, forced into a losing battle against illusions. In the skies, discipline and technology told the story. The Americans flew in layered formations, providing overlapping fields of fire, while the Chinese were bunched together, relying on visual contact to stay organized. What Beijing had hoped would be a powerful show of unity instead looked like chaos in motion, an air wing burning through its limited endurance while facing an enemy that operated as one seamless, lethal organism. Submarine checkmate. If the humiliation in the skies wasn't enough, the undersea battle turned into an even bigger embarrassment. For 8 straight days, a Virginia-class U.S. submarine had been tailing the Chinese carrier undetected. At the climax of the standoff, the submarine surfaced just 6 miles from the Shandong, close enough for Chinese sailors to see it with the naked eye. The message couldn't have been louder. "We've been here the whole time, and you never knew." For Beijing, it was the equivalent of a checkmate in 3 moves. Their carrier, the pride of their navy, had been at the mercy of an American submarine the entire time, powerless to respond. Within 90 seconds, the U.S. sub slipped back beneath the waves, leaving nothing but shaken nerves and photographs the Chinese leadership would never want to see leaked. China retreats in disgrace. By 1623 hours, the Chinese carrier group began its quiet withdrawal. The official line broadcast from Beijing was that scheduled exercises had concluded. But the truth was undeniable: they had been thoroughly outmaneuvered, outclassed, and exposed. China had set out to flex its muscles in international waters, hoping to intimidate America into backing down. Instead, they left with their weaknesses laid bare before the world. Their destroyers showed they couldn't operate aggressively without risking instant annihilation. Their submarines were so noisy they couldn't sneak up on a fishing trawler, let alone the world's most advanced navy. And their carrier aviation proved laughably inadequate against seasoned U.S. pilots trained to fight and win in any environment. The South China Sea wasn't transformed into Beijing's private pond that day. Instead, it became the stage for an unforgettable lesson: America's blue water dominance isn't just history, it's present reality. Beijing's gamble turns into global humiliation. What Beijing envisioned as a bold act of defiance had spiraled into one of the most humiliating public setbacks in modern naval history. In the hours following the standoff, signals intelligence and satellite monitoring confirmed what Pentagon officials already suspected: the Chinese command structure was in disarray. Conflicting orders were being sent to the fleet, some urging escalation, others demanding caution. The very hierarchy that Beijing had insisted would display discipline instead exposed fractures and hesitation. American commanders, on the other hand, operated like a machine. Orders flowed seamlessly through the strike group, every vessel and aircraft instantly connected through the Cooperative Engagement Capability Network. If one radar tracked a Chinese jet, every ship and fighter in the group had that information instantly. China's military, by contrast, was stuck in the 1990s, forcing its pilots and ship captains to rely on voice commands, static-filled radios, and delayed clearances from Beijing. In modern war, seconds decide survival, and the Chinese were wasting minutes. The air battle Beijing didn't want to admit. By 09:45 hours, the J-15 fighters had already run into their first major problem: fuel. Every ski-jump launch forced them to climb steeply while burning through their reserves. By the time they reached 20,000 feet, nearly a quarter of their fuel was gone. With limited endurance, every maneuver had to be calculated. American pilots knew this weakness intimately. They forced the Chinese fighters into hard turns, sudden climbs, and evasive dives, knowing every wasted second chewed up their endurance. What the Chinese pilots faced was a nightmare. Super Hornets with AESA radars could track them long before they could respond. Growlers jammed their comms so badly that some pilots were reduced to hand signals in the cockpit. On their radar displays, American jets multiplied into dozens of phantom contacts, and even when they managed to lock onto one, the signal would dissolve into static seconds later. At least 2 J-15s were forced to abort their missions after burning dangerously low on fuel in just 20 minutes of air combat maneuvering. They limped back to the Shandong, tanks nearly dry, their presence in the fight already over. Each retreat signaled to American pilots the same brutal truth. This wasn't a contest of skill, but one of technology, endurance, and training. The U.S. held all three. The submarine standoff, America's silent weapon. If Beijing thought the loud presence of its Type 039 submarine would tip the balance, the reality was far more humiliating. The boat had been tracked for hours by American sonar, its every move logged with mathematical precision. The Princeton sonar operators even mocked the sub's noise level, comparing it to a freight train underwater. The final humiliation came when the Virginia-class submarine surfaced just 6 nautical miles from the Chinese carrier. Naval analysts later said this moment was equivalent to a boxer allowing his opponent to swing wildly, only to reveal he'd been standing untouched the entire time. For the Chinese fleet, it was psychological devastation. Their most important naval asset had been shadowed, outplayed, and mocked, all while never detecting the threat until it wanted to be seen. The sight of the black hull rising from the water, cascading waves crashing down its flanks, burned into the minds of Chinese sailors. Cameras captured it all. The message was unmistakable: we were here all along, and you never stood a chance. Global reaction: shock, fear, and embarrassment. By the time the Chinese fleet began its quiet retreat, reports were already circulating across global intelligence networks. The Pentagon's National Military Command Center received real-time feeds of the standoff, and officials reportedly erupted in laughter at the moment the submarine surfaced. NATO allies received instant confirmation that American naval dominance remained unchallenged, a reassurance at a time when Chinese propaganda had been pushing the narrative of parity on the high seas. In Beijing, however, the reaction was far more subdued. Official state media released carefully edited footage of the Shandong conducting routine drills and portrayed the encounter as uneventful. But satellite imagery and intercepted chatter told another story: fuel-starved fighters, confused destroyer crews, and a carrier group that had been forced to retreat from a fight it had started. Foreign policy experts in Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore privately admitted what everyone already knew: the South China Sea remained firmly under the shadow of American power. China's attempt to rewrite the rules of navigation had not only failed but had showcased its weaknesses to the world in spectacular fashion. A navy built for show, not for war. Perhaps the most damning revelation of the encounter was how outdated and fragile the Chinese naval force truly was when tested against the U.S. Navy. The Shandong, their pride and joy, was exposed as a paper tiger. Its ski-jump system crippled its aircraft before they even left the deck, and its command structure slowed every decision to a crawl. The destroyer John Chong, which had accelerated so dramatically to provoke the U.S. fleet, found itself locked into a no-win scenario, caught between American firepower it couldn't outgun and electronic warfare it couldn't outmaneuver. And the submarine, meant to be the silent predator of the seas, turned out to be the loudest liability of them all. Every move Beijing made that day reinforced the same humiliating truth: while China has poured billions into building the outward appearance of a modern navy, the reality remains one of imitation without mastery. America's message to the world. By the time the last American jet returned to the deck of the Nimitz that evening, the South China Sea had been transformed from a contested space into a stage for one of the most one-sided shows of force in modern naval history. The message was unmistakable. America hadn't just defended freedom of navigation, it had demonstrated, in real time, why the world's shipping lanes remained secure under its watch. $3.4 trillion in annual trade continued to flow unimpeded because U.S. sailors, pilots, and submariners had once again proven their unmatched ability to dominate any opponent, anywhere, at any time. For Beijing, the gamble to intimidate had backfired catastrophically. Instead of forcing America to back down, they had reminded the entire world of the colossal gap between propaganda and reality. China's pilots panic in the skies. By 09:55 hours, the battle in the skies had devolved into a lopsided chase. American Super Hornets, flying with the confidence of pilots who knew their training and technology outclassed anything in the region, had forced Chinese J-15s into a defensive spiral. The Shandong's air wing, launched in a blaze of propaganda glory, was now scattered across the sky like a panicked flock of birds. Pilots accustomed to staged drills suddenly found themselves overwhelmed. Their radar screens filled with static from American jamming pods, their communications fractured into bursts of garbled noise. One pilot, according to intercepted transmissions, desperately shouted for vectors back to the carrier, unable to identify friend from foe. Another, his fuel gauge already flickering toward empty, broke formation without clearance, diving for safety. American pilots didn't need to press the fight. They simply shadowed the Chinese jets, maneuvering effortlessly into positions of dominance, their missile-locked tones echoing silently in helmets without ever pulling the trigger. It was a humiliation more devastating than destruction. In war games, the Chinese might have been allowed to claim symbolic victories. In real skies against real opponents, they were nothing more than targets with wings. Beijing's destroyer plays a dangerous game. On the surface, the destroyer John Chong continued its aggressive charge, plowing ahead with radar systems locked squarely on the USS Nimitz. This was no longer routine shadowing, this was fire control tracking. A digital equivalent of pointing a loaded pistol directly at an opponent's head. Inside the Princeton's combat center, the mood remained calm but tense. Every officer understood what the Chinese were doing. They weren't preparing for real combat, they were putting on a show for Beijing's leadership, hoping that their reckless gamble would force the Americans to back down without firing a shot. But the Americans didn't blink. The Princeton spy radar tracked every frequency shift, every subtle adjustment in the Chinese ship systems. Fire control solutions were updated every second. If the Zhangcheng made even the slightest move toward missile launch, its fate would be sealed in less than 30 seconds. American SM-6 interceptors would streak across the sky at Mach 3.5, reducing the destroyer to burning wreckage before its captain even realized his mistake. The Chinese vessel held the lock for 30 long seconds before disengaging. Long enough to record the provocation. Not long enough to trigger retaliation. It was a dangerous dance, and one that revealed exactly how close Beijing was willing to push the world to the edge of war. Embarrassing leaks from Beijing command. What China's leadership never intended became clear within hours of the incident. Their own internal communications, intercepted by American electronic intelligence aircraft, painted a picture of panic and indecision. The RC-135 rivet joint monitoring the event picked up Mandarin chatter that analysts later described as chaotic and amateurish. Pilots were requesting permission for maneuvers that should have been instinctive. Destroyer captains begged for clarity on rules of engagement. Carrier command issued contradictory orders, some urging fighters to engage more aggressively, others demanding immediate withdrawal. One transmission, leaked later by intelligence officials in allied nations, captured the moment a J-15 pilot asked for clearance to perform a low pass over the Nimitz. The delay in receiving an answer was nearly 3 minutes. By the time permission arrived, the opportunity was long gone. American fighters had already repositioned, and the Chinese pilot had barely enough fuel to limp back to his carrier. The leak was devastating for Beijing's image. Instead of disciplined coordination, the world saw hesitation, bureaucracy, and leaders too scared of responsibility to give their forces decisive orders. In modern warfare, seconds matter. For China, minutes of confusion sealed the narrative. Their military was a showpiece, not a fighting force. Submarine nightmare, the moment Beijing lost the undersea war. If the skies belonged to America, the seas beneath were even less forgiving for China. The Type 039 submarine tasked with shadowing the U.S. fleet had committed the ultimate mistake, surfacing its snorkel to recharge batteries within detection range.